Great. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to colorful Colorado. I am based out of our Boulder office, which is just about 30 miles outside of Denver. So welcome, welcome, welcome. As Bill said, my name is Sarah Devereaux. I head up a group at Google called Strategic Initiatives for the Google School for Leaders. And I'm here today to talk to you about a really special program that we have at Google called Sustaining High Performance for Women. This is a 3-day program that started about 5 years ago, and it's targeted to our most senior women leaders at Google, so our directors and our VPs. And it's designed to promote ongoing high performance through sustainable well-being practices. It's really intended to help women to form a different mindset about their well-being and how it relates to their performance, to help them figure out those habits, those practices that are going to help them deal with times of heightened stress. Now, we've got a couple of the traditional, well-being markers. We spend a good amount of time outdoors. We have an optional yoga class. And I honestly think there would be a revolt if we didn't offer spa services. But the core of the program is really on mindsets, assumptions, and beliefs. What do you think about your well-being? How do you feel like your well-being relates to your performance? And are there any things that are blockers for you? So is there anything that maybe you're not saying, anything that you're not thinking about when it comes to well-being that could actually be hindering your ability to sustain a high level of performance? As I'm sure a lot of you know, Google moves extremely quickly, and the pressure is pretty constant. So this is something that's really important for us to be investing in, particularly for our leadership population. Now, the program has evolved quite a bit over the years. So we started it back in 2014. We're going to talk about that a little bit. But in 2017, we launched what we call the Google School for Leaders, which is the group that I'm involved in. And this really prompted us to rethink Google's overall approach to leadership development. What's our philosophy about what makes a great leader? And how do we want to ensure that that philosophy shows up in all of our programs? So before we jump into talking about sustaining high performance specifically, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the Google School for Leaders generally. So Google has been doing leadership development for a really long time. This is not new. In 2008, we actually had in the neighborhood of a dozen different teams that were scattered across the company and across the globe who were working on building better leaders for Google. We were delivering programs, we were doing trust falls, admittedly, and we were really approaching leadership development in a super traditional way. It took us around 10 years to actually figure out that Google and really the world needed us as learning and development professionals to be approaching leadership development just a little bit differently. The times were changing. So in 2017, we started rethinking this approach to leadership development. We shifted from techniques, to mindsets. We shifted from best practice to next practice, and we really determined that it was more advantageous for us to be thinking about, okay, what are those leadership development challenges of the future? Not what people were dealing with in the past. Not necessarily what they were dealing with in the present, even. So later that same year, in 2017, we started building the Google School for Leaders. And what it is it's a modern-day leadership center of excellence that's aimed at building strong and future-ready leaders for Google. And given the impact that we have at Google, we really feel like it's our responsibility to also build great leaders for the societies that we impact. The school, as we call it, focuses on programmatic, immersive, and community-driven experiences that really challenge our leaders' mindsets and assumptions. They help them to see the world in new and different ways, and really to help them see themselves in new and different ways as well. And they encourage folks to really embrace lifelong learning as a core value. Now, as I said, we've evolved this program that I'm going to talk about, Sustaining High Performance for Women, quite a bit over the past 2 years to really reflect these design goals and these principles and go deeper on the topic of emotional resilience and well-being. But where did it all get started? Why did we think that this was a good idea? And why did we really care about the well-being of our women leaders specifically at Google. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how that came about. So somewhere, let's just call it 2012. I think it was 2012. So somewhere in the 2012 area. Products at Google were rapidly expanding. Our businesses were really taking off in brand new ways that we very honestly had very little experience in. So mobile and cloud storage in particular were gaining a lot of traction and a lot of market share. So our teams and really our leaders were under a ton of pressure to be able to deliver in these new areas. We talk about big bets, I'm sure many of you do as well at Google, and it's important that, when we've got a big bet, like mobile, way back when, that our leaders are positioned to be able to drive their teams forward in new ways. And the amount of pressure that we were seeing across our leadership population in particular was astounding. And people operations, which is the group that handles learning and development, benefits, it's basically HR, we were starting to launch resources, expanding benefits, and launching learning programs to really help employees to deal with a lot of these pressures. We saw the signs, and we started acting really quickly. So kind of 2012, 2013, somewhere in there, we started expanding a lot of our services around mindfulness, around mental health. And we started seeing mindfulness and meditation really gaining a lot of popularity across the company. It was funny to sort of walk past different conference rooms and see a bunch of engineers sitting around a table and awkwardly trying to meditate because it was the first time that their leader was doing this, like, okay, listen, HR is telling me that we do this for 3 minutes and it's going to make this meeting better, so close your eyes. But it got, it really started to gain a lot of traction, and we saw more Googlers engaging in self-reflection and self-awareness practices than kind of ever before. So in 2014, we got these results from this survey that we do. It's called Googlegeist. You might have heard of it before. We do a company-wide survey every year. And it's incredibly informative. It's brutal because we're incredibly specific, and we encourage people to really tell us what's actually going on. And what we found is that what actually was going on is that our women leaders in our most senior positions were reporting significantly lower well-being than their male counterparts. And it was disturbingly lower. So we'd been thinking about well-being and wellness for quite a while, right? So people operations was pretty quick to act. And so later that year, we get Googlegeist results in about March. We were launching the first cohort of Sustaining High Performance for Women by September of that same year. So we did the design, got it out the door, launched it to about 20 women directors. And then come Googlegeist in 2015, we saw those well-being scores go up. But it wasn't just well-being that was increasing. We also saw a lot of other metrics related to employee engagement that were going up as well. All of which were statistically significant. So we saw retention, so items related to retention were increasing. We saw items relating to innovation and also to belonging. And belonging was the one that really caught our attention, because we know that when people feel like they belong, they are more productive, they're more effective, they're more engaged. And especially when you're talking about belonging with underrepresented groups, like women in leadership in tech, this is particularly important. Belonging was also a key piece of our diversity and inclusion strategy at Google. It still is. So when we saw those results, we thought, wow, okay, we've really got something here. What do we do next? So as I said, in 2017, we formed the Google School for Leaders, and we really started evolving this approach to leadership development and sustaining high performance for women, largely because of the metrics that we were seeing that were really encouraging. This was the first program that went through a redesign that was based on this new leadership development philosophy. And then after the redesign took place, and again, we did that real quick at the beginning of 2017, but after the redesign took place, we tripled our capacity in 2018. So we did 3 times as many seats in 2018 as 2017, and we tripled down on our focus in this area. So of the 300 women leaders who have gone through the program to date, about 220 of them have actually gone through the new version. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we actually changed, because that's where the meat comes in. So when we first designed Sustaining High Performance for Women, there had never been a well-being program for senior leaders at Google, any senior leaders at Google, which was interesting because in 2012 we said, wow, we really need to focus in on well-being, and then we just sort of forgot like the leadership. We said, oh, well, they don't need it. We're just going to focus on, you know, the masses of Googlers, but we forgot that leaders really need this as well. So some of the things that we covered when we first started the program are still around today. We still talk about the importance of sleep. You should get some. It's important. It continues to amaze me how difficult it can be to convince people that that's true. And then we also still talk about healthy habits, you know, just in general. So those are still things that show up today. But the content was honestly pretty surface level when we started. So we used to show images like this one and ask people, okay, so what's the most unhealthy part of the hamburger? Yeah, anybody want to guess? Bacon, meat, bun, there you go. It's the bun. And we used to then launch into a discussion about, you know, carbs and sugar and the dangers of processed foods and the impact that has on your system and your energy and your ability to perform at a high level. And these are all true things. And then we put up a picture like this one. And we tout the benefits of walking meetings to add a little bit of, you know, activity into your day. During a time when Google's workforce was becoming more and more distributed by the hour, and it was honestly pretty uncommon for a manager to still be in the same location with all of their team. So again, neither of these suggestions are bad, they're not wrong, they're just kind of missing the point. So the issues that women in tech face, I think we can all agree, they're not caused by eating too many carbs or sitting in a conference room to take a meeting. That's not why we're seeing the results that we're seeing, you know, that we saw back in 2014 in Googlegeist. The issues go far deeper than that. You know, we've made a lot of progress over the last 100 years as women, but the reality is that we're still up against centuries of discrimination, bias, and stereotypes. One of the facts that I really like to throw out when I teach the program is that it wasn't legal until the 1960s for a woman to have her own bank account. You had to have a man on your bank account in order to open one and in order to run it, right? And it wasn't illegal until 1974 for a bank to discriminate against women solely based on their sex when it came to things like approving them for credit. 1974. So I just want you to think about that for a second. It hasn't even been 50 years since women secured their financial freedom, which is pretty incredible. We're not talking about your great-great-grandmother. In many cases, we're talking about your mom, you know, or yourself. Ooh, excuse me. So when we launched the Google School for Leaders, it became painfully obvious when we were looking at those images of hamburgers and President Obama, that we needed to make some significant changes. The school is grounded in this leadership development philosophy, as I talked about, that's based on more than just surface level issues. It's based on shifting mindsets, assumptions, beliefs, values. We're even challenging people to think more deeply about who they are, your identity, not just as a leader, as a person, as a member of humanity. So avoiding hamburgers and the buns and just taking more walks, like that's just not, it's not gonna cut it. So we started shifting, and we shifted from wellness to well-being, from sustaining performance to building resilience, and from self-efficacy to self-compassion. So spoiler, sorry about that. The new version of the program covers topics like overthinking. So this is that myth that many of us hold, that if we just keep obsessively working a problem, that eventually it will help us solve it. The obsessiveness will help us solve it. It's not true. We also talk about self-compassion, the importance of treating yourself with the same care and compassion that you would treat a friend or a loved one who's suffering. Why are we so much harder on ourselves when we're suffering? We talk about busyness. This is a big one at Google. Busy doesn't mean better. It doesn't mean you're more important. All it means is that your brain is more tired and therefore less effective. So it's important to rest your brain. And then we talk a little bit about something that we call strategic slacking. Doing nothing is not the root of all evil. It's okay to do nothing every once in a while. And actually, it's really good. Giving your mind a rest just as you give your body a rest has been proven over and over again, scientifically through research, there's data, that it's going to lead to increased creativity. These were hard things for actually our women leaders to embrace. They would say things like, well, if I don't stay on top of everything, I'm going to fall behind. I'm already at a disadvantage, being the only woman around the table with 20 other men. How can I have to be better than everybody else. I have to stay busier than everybody else. So even though some of these probably sound a little bit like common sense, it was hard to get some of our women leaders to really embrace the fact that these things were true and they could be true for them too. So this is just a sampling of topics that we go over, a little bit different than what I was talking about before. And we have 3 different versions of the program. And we have 3 different combinations of topics, and we have 3 different external facilitators. The reason that we do this is because we want to allow women to be able to choose who they're going to go through this journey with and what areas they really want to focus in on. This topic of resilience and compassion and well-being, these are really big topics, and they're really personal topics. So we wanted to make sure that women had a choice of who they got to go through this with, ensuring that that content resonated best with the goals that they have. So we expose who's teaching which sessions and what the content's actually going to look like so that people can pick the one that's going to be most resonant for them. We also give our external partners as well as our internal facilitators. So each of our external partners works with an internal Google facilitator. And we also give them a lot of leeway. So there's really not an agenda or a facilitator guide for this program because the magic and the power really comes out when you're seeing what's happening with the cohort, you're seeing what's happening in the moment, and you're able to flex to what they need. So we have about, I would say in the neighborhood of 4 to 5 times as much content available than what we actually are able to cover. And the facilitators pay attention. During the cohort, we have multiple daily debriefs where we talk about which direction we're going, how we want to pivot. And they're able to choose from this menu of options about all of these different practices, activities, et cetera. Sometimes the best activity for a cohort is actually to get them out of the room and just let them go sit, like somewhere beautiful, and reflect and relax and just turn their brains off. Sometimes we've actually, where normally we would be going over overthinking practices, sometimes we've just told them, okay, here's what overthinking is, now we want you to go practice it for 2 hours because this cohort needs it. So it just depends on what we're noticing. And we have a bunch of triggers that we look for. I talked a little bit about our external partners. I would be remiss if I didn't highlight them just really quickly. So we work with Rachel Simmons, who is a New York Times bestselling author of books like The Curse of the Good Girl and Enough as She Is. We also work with Dr. Christine Carter, a happiness expert, who wrote the books Raising Happiness and The Sweet Spot. And then we also work with Joanna Barsh, who was one of the founding members of the Centered Leadership Program at McKinsey. And Joanna's content, I'll say, like we have her in for our VPs, her content goes particularly deep. She talks a lot about identity, a lot about purpose, and gets really, really deep into individual belief systems, which is pretty powerful. But I guess the point of all of this is that no two cohorts are the same, and I really feel like that's part of the magic, and it's part of why the engagement in this program is so high. They really feel like it's being customized for them in the moment because it is. So I want to talk about another reason that I think links up with engagement. So now that we had this program that embodied a lot of Google's new leadership development philosophy, we were cultivating that internal environment to help women be able to shift mindsets in the moment, to be able to shift when they're under stress. We wanted to focus on the external environment and play around with, okay, what does this look like if we were to spend some time actually cultivating the environment that people are going through in a really intentional way and not just sitting them around a circle in a conference room, right? It's probably not the best place for a program like this. So we spent a lot of time studying something called Neuro Aesthetics. Is anyone familiar with Neuro Aesthetics? No one. Okay, so let's talk about it for a minute. So Neuro Aesthetics is an area of study that explores the biological reasons why we as humans find something beautiful or moving. And it goes into the impact that these sensory experiences have on our brains, neuro, and our behaviors. So when it comes to the Google School for Leaders and leadership development at Google, what we're specifically interested in is, okay, what neuroaesthetic triggers can we pull that are going to increase learning and that are going to help with this kind of developmental transformation, mindset transformation that we're after? So we played around with a couple of things. So I want to walk through a few of them with you. So one of the things that we looked at was event spaces. And what we did is we realized that a lot of the programs that we were running, we were choosing places that had all the elements, like they had the right number of breakout rooms, they had a good main room, they had enough space for people to walk around, they had a spa, it's a well-being program after all. But we weren't choosing locations that were really helping us to create the mood that we were going after, that really matched the objectives of the program. So you're not gonna host a program like this in a Google space in the middle of Silicon Valley, and you're probably not gonna host it in a high-rise hotel in the middle of Manhattan. You're gonna try to go a little bit further out. You're gonna try to find somewhere that feels like people can disconnect, because the whole point is for them to disconnect. We also, of course, look for places with natural light, with inspiring views, all those good things. Those are things that we have on all of our programs. But for this one in particular, we actually made the decision that even though people complained when we did it, we went 2.5 hours away from Silicon Valley. So we went down to Carmel Valley, which in traffic, yes, is 2.5 hours. It doesn't look like that on the map, and people complained. People were really irritated with us that we were taking them that far away from their home base. But once they got into it, they realized why. And it's the same thing in New York. We go all the way out to Montauk for this program, which is like 3 hours from JFK if you hit it at the wrong time. And people were really pissed, like the first day. And then after the first activity, which we'll talk a little bit more about, they realized why. So event spaces really matter, and it's not a one-size-fits-all, and it's important to realize what's right for your learners, not necessarily what's convenient. The other thing that we played around with was furniture and objects. I know this might sound silly, but the color of the chairs actually matters, and how it coordinates with the rugs, and whether the rugs are layered artfully instead of just thrown in the middle of the circle. So we played around with these things and we tested it out. We made the room look ugly, and then we made the room look great, and we changed the color of the furniture, and we changed the color of the facilitator's chair, and we changed how many objects we used, how many accessories. We had model airplanes for certain programs. For this program, we had little kind of manipulatable? No, that's not right. Malleable, let's go with that. That's easier to say. So we had these little objects that people could play with that were sculptures to inspire this wonder, this awe, to give your hands something else to do than to reach for your phone. When your brain had this one moment of reflection. We didn't want people reaching for their phone because they were so uncomfortable with being in their own brain and just letting it wander that we saw that start to happen. So furniture and objects. And then another one we played with was signature scents. And yes, that's a nose, and I do mean something that smells. So we worked with this woman, Mandy Aftel, I believe her name is, in Berkeley, and she runs this museum about scent. And we created these 2 signature scents for the school, one on reflection and one on relaxation. And I'll talk a little bit more about how these play into the actual curriculum in just a second. But the reflection one in particular is fascinating. Like, people really got into it and reported that if they tried it out, you just use the little roller ball, put it on your wrist before you engage in the activity. People who tried it out reported that they were much faster to drop into that beautiful place of reflection and acceptance than people who didn't try it. And we've been running this one for about 1.5 years, so we have a good amount of data around this at this point. And scent is actually pretty amazing, so I'm going to geek out for just a second. It's the only one of our senses that actually goes directly to our central nervous system without going through the thalamus, which is pretty fascinating. So basically what that means is that when you interact with a scent, when you interact with a smell, when you perceive it, your body is interacting with it and interpreting it before the rest of your brain has even figured out that you're smelling anything. So the trigger to get somebody into a new mental space is it's instantaneous, which is pretty incredible. Okay, so a couple more. Threshold rituals. So I'm sure that some of you can relate to this, but people in training really like their phones. And they really like their laptops, and they keep it open. Sometimes, some of them even keep the notifications on, which is excellent. And so one of the things that we played around a little bit with, in this age of distraction that Peter was talking about earlier, is we took and we created what we call a detached station. And we put it in a corner of the room, and it's got every plug possible. Like, if you can come up with a phone or a laptop or a tablet or a pair of earphones that I don't have a plug for, like, I would be shocked. So we have everything possible that you need. And we even have these little hand-knitted sweaters that hang on this little foam board behind the detached station. And that's because if it's like an emotional thing for you to leave your phone, to abandon it that way, you can tuck it into a little sweater, and it'll be cozy and safe and warm and waiting for you, and it's gonna be okay. Like, just walk away. So it sounds ridiculous, right? But like, it really works. And the women who put their phone into the little sweater, and we have this at all of our programs, but they put it in the little sweater, they are less likely to pick it up and take it out and use it on a break than women who just leave it. And then people who have it face up and not in a sweater and only in airplane mode and not fully turned off are the most likely to pick up their phones on a break. So that's the other little trick, is that when we ask people, okay, does everyone have their phone on them? Could you just pull it out for me? Okay, I want you to turn it into airplane mode or turn it off. Not on silent, not on vibrate, like pretend I'm a flight attendant. And I want you to put it over, everybody's gonna stand up together, and we're all gonna drop our phones off. So it's not optional. It's mandatory that you take your phone out of the circle. The other thing that's mandatory is that you take your stuff out of the circle. So even though we have a personal storage unit that we tell people about when they're coming into the room, you still get those people that are like obsessively, trying to kick their bags under their chairs, or do I put it under the person in front of me? Oh my God, it's a circle, that doesn't work. Do I put it behind me? Does it go next to me? But everybody's still got all their crap, sitting around. And the reality is that what the research tells us is that physical clutter creates mental clutter. And just because it's not your stuff doesn't mean that it's not creating mental clutter for somebody else. So again, we're all gonna stand up together, and we're gonna move our things to a really lovely, organized personal storage unit so that we can just not think about them. Okay, a couple other things that I wanna go through here. So natural elements, we use live plants. One of the things that's really important about this is that when you're in a room for a long period of time, and we do a lot of things outdoors as well, but we're in the room, a good amount of time, you wanna have a good amount of actual, real, not fake, natural plants, because it helps us to get that feeling that we're communing with nature even when we're in the room, which helps with just kind of lowering our heart rate, letting us relax. And then curated music is another thing. So you're not gonna play the same music at a social hour or around the fire pit after dinner as you're gonna play during a deeply emotional, reflective exercise where everybody's crying. Those are not the same, two pieces of music. Music is a really powerful way for creating the right tone and the right mood, and we want to make sure that we have the right music at the right moment to help people, again, just kind of drop in to that place of learning. So I wanted to share with you just quickly a couple of images about what this looks like in practice. Hopefully you can see that it's not just about what we have in our training spaces, but it's really about how we're using them and how the spaces themselves are really thoughtfully chosen for what we're doing. We want participants to feel safe to explore new emotional territories, and we want them to feel like they can relax, to feel like they can unplug, to quiet their thoughts and to open their minds to new developmental possibilities. It's the whole point, to help them think about something that they didn't think was possible for them before. And what we found is that the way that you use physical space makes a really big difference in achieving these goals. Okay, so I wanted to share just a quick example of one of the activities that we run that I just love. This is my favorite part to facilitate in the program. So it's called You at Your Best, and it's based off of a study that was published by the University of Michigan and a Harvard Business Review article. And basically what we do is we ask women to nominate people in their network that, in their lives, that they feel have seen them at their best. So somebody who has a story to tell about when you were at your best, whatever that means. And we don't give them any more context other than that. They ask lots of questions. We don't tell them anything else. Once we get that list of nominees, we then reach out to them and we ask them to just write a letter to that woman telling her about the time when she was at their best, or at her best in their eyes. We print the letters. Nobody sees them except for our program coordinator. Nobody reads them. It's entirely confidential. We print the letters. We put it in an envelope. We tie it with a ribbon. And during this exercise, after day one, kind of the intro, et cetera, we take everybody down to this beautiful rose garden that you can see here. And we give them their letters. We give them their little roller ball for scent, if they want to engage in that with us and try a little scent experiment for reflection. And we give them a little, personal-sized tissues, because usually people are crying within the first couple of minutes. And we send them out into this beautiful garden to read their letters and to reflect based on a couple of questions that we've given them. As I'm sure you can imagine, this can be a really emotional experience, particularly depending on what's in the letters or what isn't in the letters. And we want to ensure that we're creating the right space in order for people to have that experience. We do this on day one of the program. They have been with us for 45 minutes when we do this. And then after they're done with their self-reflection, we ask them to get into groups and to share what they're learning and what they thought about with women that they don't know. So we're really asking them to jump in the deep end in terms of the pool of vulnerability. And so creating and using everything that we learned around Neuro Aesthetics to create the space for this session is really critical. So from a visual standpoint, we have the curated furniture and accessories, and we're not just going to haul the chairs from the conference room down into the garden, right? Like, we want to make sure that the furniture that we choose and the way that we're accessorizing, I think you can see in this photo maybe, but we have like little wicker baskets of blankets to make sure that, like, if you need a blanket, sometimes you just want to hug a pillow when you're having an emotional experience, or wrap yourself up in a blanket. It gets cold in Carmel Valley. So we want to make sure that the seating areas that we put together are really inviting, and that it allows people to just kind of, again, sink into that safe space. We have The custom scent that I talked about in terms of olfactory. And then auditory, we have soft music running. We talked about that already. But also choosing to come down into this little rose garden in the venue that we use, it was also really intentional from an auditory standpoint. So it's nature, right? So you're hearing sounds of birds and insects and those little peeper frogs. And they have a couple of fountains that are scattered, kind of throughout the garden as well. If anybody's ever listened to music before you're trying to go to bed at night, oftentimes you'll hear water running, right? That's very intentional because, it lowers our heart rate, and it allows us to kind of drop into this state of relaxation. One of the things that's really difficult for women about this particular activity is that it's hard to actually read letters of admiration about yourself. As human beings, we are wired to remember 4 times as many negative pieces of information about ourselves as we are to remember positive. So for many people, it's actually really uncomfortable to be reading lots of praise about yourself and to accept it and to not start making excuses like, oh, well, that was just that one time, or, oh, well, I was just having a really good day, or, oh, I wasn't really at my best, I was a disaster, this isn't a good example. It's really easy to start saying some of those things. So we want to help women to drop into this place of reflection and also acceptance that they're wonderful a lot of the time, you're great, and other people can see it, and we want to help you see it in yourself. So I wanted to share just a couple of quotes with you about what we're hearing from women who have gone through the program. So this was a safe space to share an experience, learn techniques, make connections, and build community. Absolutely invaluable, this course addressed the root causes of stress and internal conflict that diminish the well-being and performance of senior women at Google. And this has completely transformed the way that I think about my career, my team, myself, and my approach to both work and life. The reason I wanted to highlight this is because it's really different than the feedback that we got from participants who went through the previous version of the program. When we were still talking about hamburgers and walking meetings, the feedback was positive, but it was pretty surface level. I'm so relaxed. Thank you for investing in us in this way. Or maybe I have new ways of thinking about my daily routine or how I wake up in the morning. You can see that the depth of feedback that we're getting is matching the depth of the content that we're providing. And sometimes, I guess my message here would be, it can be scary to go there. It's a lot easier to just talk about nutrition and make sure everybody's got a spa appointment and take some hikes. Like that's a lot easier to do, and it's gonna make people feel good, but is it really gonna get at the root causes of stress and internal conflict? So I've painted a picture that seems like we've got it all figured out, but we don't. So we still have a lot of questions. This version of the program's been going for about 18 months, which means that we're probably 18 months away from needing a new one. The challenges that people are facing continue to evolve, and our ways of helping them cope with those challenges also need to continue to evolve. So a couple things that we're thinking about, all prioritized as number 1, which I don't know how that happened, but they're all number 1. They're all very important. So how will we continue the learning outside of the classroom? So one of the things, it's great, right? It's great to get together for 3 days and feel great and go really deep on some of these topics and talk about mindsets and assumptions. But then what happens after they leave? We currently have a post-program, 6 weeks out, care package that we send with a few little things to help them remember us by, a scent, again, for memory. And then also a few kind of exercises that they can do or experiments they can try. We encourage them to stay in contact as a cohort, but is that enough? It doesn't seem like it's enough. So what happens next in terms of what we do in between? And then what metrics should we be measuring to measure impact? Honestly, we didn't measure the impact of a lot of these experiments that we ran. We just tried it. We figured, okay, anything we do is probably gonna have a positive impact on well-being. It's a good thing. We're gonna spend the time actually figuring out the content. We're not gonna spend the time going through and trying to measure the efficacy. We're at a point, though, where we probably should be measuring impact a little bit more rigorously. And when it comes to shifting mindsets and how you think about yourself as a human being, we're not really sure how to do that. So if anybody's got any ideas, please find me later. And then who should attend? So should this be something that all women at Google do? What about men, transgender, non-binary? Like how do we make sure that this is an inclusive experience and also that it's really moving the needle? If it's only women, even though this is really special, like, is that limiting the conversation? Is that limiting our impact? So these are a lot of the big things that we're thinking about right now. We've got about 5 minutes. I'd love to hear any questions that all of you have. Thank you very much. Does anyone have a question? Yeah, over here. Not yet.
Like, I know I would love to go to this.
So the question was, have we thought about opening it up to the public? We have. We've thought about opening everything that we're doing within the Google School for Leaders to the public. So we aren't sure when that's going to happen or what that's actually going to look like, but it is something that's on our roadmap, hopefully within the next kind of 2 to 3 years. Yeah, thank you, right here.
One thing I was curious that you mentioned was the dress code or how people come to these types of events.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the question was about the dress code or how people come to these types of events. So we really encourage women on day one to dress as they are comfortable. And we encourage that throughout everything. Like my normal modus operandi at Google is jeans and a t-shirt and flip-flops. So that's how I go to work every day. This is weird. I actually had to dig this out. But it's like, oh, okay, jacket. But what we often see is that women come in on day one with their heels and with their, perfectly fitted jeans and with their, shirts that are supposed to look casual, but they're actually kind of fancy and they look great. And then on day two, there's no makeup and there's the yoga pants and like, let's just have a good time together and like be in a moment where we can be vulnerable. And if that's what you're comfortable, if you're comfortable in the 3-inch heels, wear the 3-inch heels every day. Like that's great. But if you want to come in just in your pajamas, we're actually fine with that. Do whatever you want. Yeah, so I'll do this table here and then over there real quick.
Folks, sorry, Sarah.
I have 2 minutes.
Please use the microphones if you would. There are microphones on the table. It will make it easier for everybody to hear, and our virtual audience can't hear it all. So please do that.
Can you talk a little bit maybe about some of the challenges that you experience when you're trying to sell this to the senior staff? Because I imagine in a company like Google where they're very data-driven, you've got maybe the story now to paint why it's successful. But I imagine people at first thought were like, you're telling us we need to invest in rugs and experience and things that are very different than what a lot of people think when they think about engagement.
Yeah. So I feel like I should say that it was hard. But it actually wasn't, which was really interesting. And I think it's because we did ground all of that in data. So we partnered with Johns Hopkins, who's the leading institution on Neuro Aesthetics. And we took a lot of outside data that Johns Hopkins provided to us through that partnership to help our leadership understand, like, okay, here's what we want to try out. And given the outsized impacts that our leaders have, the price tag of the experiments that we wanted to run just weren't that big compared to the price tag of an ineffective leader. Okay, I feel like I didn't do any over here. I have 1 minute left. Okay, we'll do here.
My question is about the size of the group that attends.
Yeah.
And what did you learn
Yeah.
figuring out what the right size would be?
Yeah, the sweet spot is 14 to 16. So once you get past 16, it starts to feel too big. People start to be able to hide. And given the level of vulnerability that we're asking for, when you've got 18 people in a room and only 17 show up for a morning session, you sort of realize that there's somebody missing, but you're not exactly sure who, and you only saw him for a couple hours last night, and I didn't really sit next to that person at dinner. So it's easier for people to not engage when there's a larger group. Now, for some of our other programs, we go all the way up to 60. But for this one in particular, because of the level of vulnerability, we keep it around 14 to 16. Folks, thank you so much. I'm going to be here all day. I really appreciate your attention, and I'd be happy to chat about anything you're interested in learning more about later on. Enjoy the rest of your day.